everybody. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm coming to you with a special bonus Monday episode with Aram Han Sifuentes, who is an artist based in Chicago, and she is the creator of the protest banner Lending Library. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Great. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So someone sent me a month or two ago a link to an article that you were featured in, and I immediately said, this is totally up my alley. This is the kind of thing I get really excited about. So I'm excited to talk to you about it. We'll talk in a minute about what the protest banner Lending Library is, but let's start with just a little bit of a brief history of who you are, what sort of art you work on, where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I am a first generation immigrant myself. I immigrated here with my family from South Korea and have lived in California for most of my life, and then recently moved to Chicago. It's actually not that recent, but it feels recent. In 2011, so it's been seven years now. Wow. Transplanted into Chicago, and I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley and went to graduate school here at the School of Art Institute of Chicago, studied fiber art. And now I'm a practicing artist, have been for a while, doing a lot of work around themes of immigration and doing this artwork that's working with a lot of different communities, particularly working with immigrant non-citizen communities to make artwork. And that's also kind of known as social practice in the art field. So doing that type of work to kind of bring awareness to some of the difficulties that immigrant communities have, and just kind of creating platforms where immigrant communities and the disenfranchised communities can participate and just be active citizens in a different way where, society doesn't oftentimes give us that kind of access.
So I'm a knitter, and when I think of fiber arts, I immediately think of yarn. But most of what you do is more with sewing?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I do sewing. When me and my family immigrated to the United States, I was 5 years old, and my mom was actually an artist in Korea and ran her own art center. So my father was a banker, and moving to the U.S., their employment options were very limited. So what type of work they ended up doing was working at a dry cleaning business. And then they ended up coming to own their own, and they still do this type of work today. So at the age of 6 years old, my mom was, learning to be a seamstress and just bringing all of this work home with her at all times, right? Even after spending like 12 hours at the cleaners, she would bring extra work home, and she still does that today. And so me spending time with my mom meant that I had to sew, right, to like help her with her work. And so that's where I learned how to sew, and that's kind of the context in which I see the act of sewing. So yeah, in my work, I sew because of that very personal history that I have, and it's the perfect medium really for me to talk about immigration because of my experiences and the experiences of my immigrant communities, who many of them work in the garment industry.
Yeah, I was interested to think about it in that way. So a lot of knitters that I know think about knitting as historically women's work, and so by knitting and by using knitting and craftivism, this is something that's sort of reclaiming women's work. But it's really interesting and a good sort of challenge to my way of thinking about things to think about sewing as immigrant work.
Definitely, and being in field of fiber and being, I teach at the Art Institute now, and I teach in the fiber department, right? So like these are definitely histories and discourses that I am definitely a part of, right? And so what is really how it gets talked about, right? Like knitting and this type of handwork is women's work, and it's like done in the domestic space. But it's really an old notion, right? Because like who still does this type of work? Whose domestic space are we talking about? So really, like when we say women's work and we say domestic space, and we talk about these kind of fantasized notions of like sewing for the family or knitting things for the family, I have to really question like which women are we talking about?
Hmm.
women's work. That term is used universally, but it's not universal. And then domestic space, like whose domestic space are we talking about? Like that, first of all, like the notions of domestic space is like talking about how, it's like this private sphere, right? Where the woman is doing, cleaning and taking care of the child or children and sewing for the family and cooking. And that's kind of the notion of domestic space or what that looks like. But look at my mother, for example, right? That's not what her domestic space looks like. Like, first of all, immigrant women of color have historically been dispossessed, so they don't even have access to that privatized space, right? So, first, I question that. And then, secondly, my mother's domestic space was her workspace, right? It's where capital, it's where
Mm-hmm.
her work entered the home, and she brought that home with her. So, it becomes this infected, contaminated space, right? Yeah, these are things that definitely I'm just like, we need to rethink these universal terms that we think, when we say women's work or domestic space, and really like analyze that to understand that it's not all women have access to this, or it doesn't speak for everybody.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm glad that you're bringing that to my consciousness. So thank you for that. Don't want to get too far away from, however, the protest banners because I'm really excited about this and, of course, relates directly to the conversation that we're having.
Hmm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how and why you started making protest banners?
Yeah, so being a fiber artist, of course, right? I had just during the elections, I was working on this one exhibition at the Jane Addams Hull House. It was called the Official Unofficial Voting Station, Voting for All Who Legally Can't. And I collaborated with over 15 different artists in cities all over the US and Mexico. And we created over 25 different voting stations, open to all, but particularly for those who are disenfranchised. So at the Hull House space, the whole installation was pretty much filled with protest banners. And so I was already thinking about protest banners. And when the elections happened, and the results, right? Trump winning, it just was like, I just didn't know what to do. And I had this really stupid fabric of pugs laying around, just staring at that. And I was like, what do I do with this? Oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this into a protest banner. And, seeing all the protests erupting, I was just like, I have to make this banner. So that was my first banner, and I put "Dump Trump" on it. Like, put photographs, took photos, and put it on my Instagram and Facebook. And my friends were all like, "That's so cool. I want to make one. How do you make one?" And it was like kind of a lonely experience, right? Like right after the election. So I was like, "Oh yeah, I should just like have my friends come over and like make this thing with me." So I had a few friends come over one day, and we like drank a ton and made a bunch of friends. you know and then I opened it up on my Facebook, like, hey, I'm gonna have another day of this on Thursday. If you guys just want to come over, whoever wants to come can come. And it was like 30 people who were like, I'll be there. My place was so small. I was like, there's no way. And luckily, my friends who work for and like run art spaces were like, oh my God, can you do this here? And it just like ended up being these kind of workshops, and it just happened that quickly, right? And then how it turned into a lending library was because, yeah, so like I was making these protest banners, responding to the elections, responding to all the protests that were happening. But me being a non-citizen at the time and me having this 1-year-old child, I was just like, I don't feel safe going out there. So
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, wait, this is really silly, because then I want these things to be used, but I can't use them. And I don't want just like my friends to take them out for me. It could be something bigger where other people can like come and check them out. And actually, Jane Addams at the Hull House, during the time of Jane Addams, she had an art lending library.
Hmm.
So just like all of these things I've been thinking about just came together, where I was like, oh, I'm going to make a protest banner lending library. And these workshops, people making all of these banners, they can either take theirs to use, and if they can't use it for any reason, like they're non-citizens or new mothers, or, have disabilities, then they could donate it to the library. And in that way, we're still able to participate and put our voices and our slogans out there.
So how many banners do you have now?
We have over 200.
And how many do you think you personally made?
So now we're a team of four.
Okay.
So it's me and then my collaborators, Veronica Casado Hernandez, Ishita Darap, and Tabitha Tunkias. And so we make a bunch. So I think maybe I would say like 100 is made by us. Maybe less. Because actually we give a lot of ours away.
The rest are coming in through those workshops?
Yeah, the rest come in through workshops. So people donate them during the workshops, people donate them after they use it in protest and then donate it. And then people who have heard about the project nationwide will just like contact me. Hey, I made this banner. Can I donate to the library? And even just like ship it out and donate it that way.
So what is the process? I'm sure there are fiber artists listening to this, so I'm curious about your process of making the banners. What kinds of cloth do you use, and do you mostly sew them? Or are there other ways of affixing materials?
Yeah, so we use heat and bond, which is a fusible web. So it's pretty much this, paper glue thing. It used to be called like stitch witchery, right? Where you can, if you use heat, so with an iron, if you iron it onto fabric, then it's like this glue adhesive. So we use like the heat and bond ultra strength, or I forgot what the actual name of it, but like the most powerful one, right? So we use that. We iron it onto felt, and we have stencils of letters, so people stencil it out on the other side of the heat and bond, and then people cut it out. We peel that other side off and then iron it onto the background fabric. So no sewing is required. And that makes it more accessible, right? Where it's a very easy process. You could buy all of these things, on Amazon or Joann's or, your local craft stores. And as long as you know how to cut with scissors and iron, or we can even help you with ironing, right? Then you're able to make a banner.
So this sounds like a great thing for kids too. I mean, my kids would need help ironing, but they can mostly cut. So
How old are they?
So my kids are 6 and 3, and my 6-year-old made his own sign for the Women's March this past weekend.
Oh, cool. So. Awesome. Yeah. Your 3-year-old.
Yeah, my 3-year-old, he can cut a little bit. It would be interesting abstract shapes, but I always like ways that you can get kids involved. So I think that sounds like a really great way to get kids involved in that.
Yeah. And kids make the best slogans.
Yeah, my 6-year-old sign said, "Boys will be feminists."
Oh, cute. That's great. Yeah, we get a lot of kids that make like ones that say like, "I'm awesome," It's like, yes, I want to see a banner that says "I'm awesome,"
Yeah. So is your lending library nonpartisan in signs?
Well, I have my politics and my collaborators, have our politics. But really,
Sure.
We have people that come in and make banners with slogans that don't align with our politics. And that is more than welcome, Of course, when you like walk into a space and you see all these like, pro-trans, like, anti-Trump, then you get a kind of sense of what our politics are. But really, we try to make it this open space where, we want to support everyone's voice. And that's difficult sometimes, but it's important. So we've had like situations where people come in and make like an All Lives Matter banner. And that doesn't align with my politics, but it's also kind of nice that, each of these banners take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to make. And so we can engage in, conversations if we want to, or we could just kind of focus on like helping people make their banners regardless of, what the slogans are, what their politics are.
Yeah.
That kind of support and, this like, that kind of openness, I think, is really